Hello, Derek and Danny.
Hello,
Hello,
Bob. How are
Bob.
you?
I'm fine. Let me tell our viewing and listening audience that this is one of those once every 2 months joint productions of the Non-Zero podcast and your American Prestige podcast, in which we chart the ongoing descent of American empire into ineffectual thrashing and the attendant descent of the world toward the apocalypse. Is that a fair? I was just going from memory, but that is our mission statement, right?
Yeah, we're big potatoes here.
I don't know. I think everything's going great. I don't know. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
That was a
The
nice
Empire's
insider
great.
reference there, Danny.
Yeah, thank
To
you, thank
for
you, thank you.
the regular non-zero listeners to the Paul Bloom segments
Yeah,
episodes.
you have
So
Paul Bloom every couple weeks, right? It's pretty
yeah,
regular.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I hear the
Mhm.
mellifluous voice of Bob Wright coming from my wife's cell phone in the other room, I
God
know.
bless that woman.
Yeah, she's the biggest Bob Wright fan.
You
We
know, if
named our child Bob Wright Bessner.
all Americans married as wisely as you, Danny, it would
I
be a
know,
much
I know.
better
If
country.
only, if only.
Um, so I don't know, where should we begin? I mean, the are we still the first of these we had was right around October 7th. And at
We
the
had to
time,
record an emergency supplement,
yeah,
as I
we
recall,
taped right
because of
before
October 7th.
October 7th and then taped a little prelude,
Mhm.
to paste onto it after October 7th before we posted it. And I really didn't think at that point that whatever was coming in the way of retaliation would still be going on. What is it, 8 months later now?
Yeah, it's pretty terrible. I knew there would be a gigantic and a vicious response. But I guess there was always a possibility that they would fully commit to ethnic cleansing. I think that this is not exactly a secret amongst the Israeli right, that this has been a goal for some time. But yeah, I guess, yeah, I wouldn't have. I don't know. I knew it was going to be terrible, but I guess the scale of the horror was unable to be predicted, even though it should have been predicted. I think it was fairly
Well,
obvious.
I mean, it wasn't so much the scale I doubted. I mean, I didn't anticipate this scale, but I knew that the ratio of dead Palestinians to number of Israelis who had been killed on October 7th would have to get up, 10 to 1, 20 to 1, as it typically does in these retaliations. But I just didn't think it would kind of take this long.
Derek, what did you think? I mean, I know you don't like prognostication, but I'm curious, looking back.
Um, I mean, yeah, I didn't have any specific uh, thoughts about how far it might go. I just knew that it was going to go uh, very badly, that there was going to be a great deal of violence unleashed on the Palestinians. And I try not to like think in terms of like, well, I think they're going to do, I think this is how far they'll go, or that's how far I just assume that, whoever is doing the thing will just go for broke. And really, that's, I mean, of any situation, it's like, you go as far as you can before somebody stops you. And in this case, there's nobody. And you could see that on October 8th. There was nobody that was going to stop the Israelis from, just going completely all out ethnic cleansing,
Well, it's the
whatever
completion
the
of the
end game is.
project, right? I feel like this is
Yeah,
like,
to some
I mean, they've
extent.
been stating this for decades. This is the thing that's very frustrating in the American media. I mean,
And
the
the
Israeli
fact
right.
that the people who are in these people are in government now, like the people who have been talking about resettling Gaza, who think that Ariel Sharon was some kind of hippie peacenik for leaving in the first place, and who want to put, not just resettle in the somewhat minimalistic way that there had been settlements in Gaza, but to do it fully. Like, they're in government now. They're not on the fringe anymore. They're in the government. So yeah, it was not set up to be a pleasant situation.
Yeah, it seems to me at this point, we face the prospect of this still going on when the American election happens. And if Trump wins, the prospect of him greenlighting the wholesale ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Now, Biden, I assume at that point might actually put his foot down. I don't know, but certainly Trump would be less inclined to put his foot down than Biden would.
Biden just seems so ineffectual. I mean, did you read that article? I think it came out today about how the Democratic Party is freaking out about because he obviously looks like a dead zombie. I mean, like
it's in Politico. I saw it. I didn't read it.
Politico.
But I saw it.
Yeah. I skimmed it right before we got on. It just seems like it's impossible to ignore, even for the most insidery of insider people. So it's difficult to me to know, and we don't really know who is actually running this foreign policy. And I don't know what their document. Hopefully, they're saving documents. But we'll look back on this and see who is actually making these decisions. I imagine it's the people around him more than Biden. I mean, Biden just seems so old. I would imagine. I bet he's not lucid for several hours a day. Like I bet he is not there for a lot of, like Reagan was or Woodrow Wilson was in the second.
I haven't seen evidence. I don't know. I haven't read evidence of out and out dementia, but I don't, I mean, it's not a good look looking as old as he looks and talking the way he talks. And these debates are a big gamble, but he has to take it, I guess, because he seems kind of clearly behind in the race. But I don't know that it matters who's making the decision, because all the power, all the political power is on the pro-Israel side. And this is really still not quite acknowledged. There was a piece in the Washington Post, and I like bookmarked it here. I'm sorry, the Wall Street Journal. And it was, the head is, Israel's deadly Rafah strike turns up political pressure on Biden. And then the subhead is, President faces more calls from his left for the U.S. to break with Israel. And then it's like, coming after weeks of pro-Gaza protests at Royal College campuses, the latest violence underscores Biden's continuing struggle over how much support to give Israel. And then it says, the left flank of his party argues that the U.S. is abetting immoral behavior in Gaza, including by providing deadly weapons. And then the last sentence is, the rest of the whole assessment of the political calculus, the last sentence is, his party also contains pro-Israel Democrats. Well, I would say that's putting it kind of mildly.
It does contain like pro-Israel Democrats.
Donors, all the people with money are pro-Israel. All the powerful organizations, beginning with AIPAC and not ending there, are pro-Israel. It's not a tough call to make politically, it seems to me. I mean, it's unfortunate for him that a couple of swing states have a high population of Arab Americans, but it's pretty clear to me where the power is. Am I missing something here?
No, I'm beginning to think capitalism distorts democracy, but maybe I should look more into this.
Okay, let's not go crazy.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the institutional power is also heavily weighted to older people because older people have more resources for a variety of reasons, and it's clearly on the Israel side and has been for a long time. Though I do agree with you, Bob. You've been saying this for a while. I wouldn't, say this is in the long-term interest of Israel itself if one is concerned with the Jewish state. But that is obviously not an argument that has found much purchase amongst the quote-unquote pro-Israel side in the United States. And it's a very grim moment. And I think the sad thing is that there's nothing for ordinary Americans to really do about it. It just once again highlights the inability of ordinary people to actually affect particularly foreign policy, but also American policy generally. We're just increasingly in an oligarchic, almost pre-modern, feudal-esque structure. And this is just another example of that.
Yeah, I mean, it is in the interest of the politicians often when it's not in the interest of the nation. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu and the most extreme elements in Gaza have been playing a non-zero-sum game with each other forever. It's good politics on both sides. Maybe Hamas has pushed it too far this time. We'll see. But I've been saying forever this is not good for Israel, and that the quote pro-Israel voices in America are not advocating things that are good for Israel.
I completely agree.
I think there was a piece that Eli Clifton did for Responsible Statecraft a few weeks ago that was pretty clear about this. Like, the base of the Democratic Party in polling clearly has serious misgivings about what's happening in Gaza, but the funders, the big money people, they're all almost entirely pro-Israel in a way that is would skew, I think, the political considerations for the Biden administration.
Yeah, and the voters, I don't think there are that many voters left of center who actually prioritize this issue that highly.
So
That's the other thing.
I've been thinking about this, and you're right. I mean, if you dig into some of the polling where they actually ask, how important, what do you think about this issue, and then how important is it to you? There's only a fairly small percentage who say that Gaza is actually, very important to them or somewhat important to them, which first of all, I think in a race like this, that's going to come down to a few thousand votes in a handful of states, like that's still significant to me. But what I feel like a lot of the effects of Gaza play out in terms of other things that people are concerned about, that they don't necessarily register that this is about Gaza, but like watching Biden, for a group of voters who think that Biden's too old to do the job, watching him get, dog walked by Netanyahu every day, basically, or, at least a few times a week for 8 months, just feeds into the perception that he's feeble, he's weak, he's not up to the job. And that's been a consistent pattern. And then you get these ineffectual leaks out of the White House, like, well, we're really mad, we're really frustrated, we're concerned. Concern is a big one. And it just comes off as like you're completely over, you're out of your depth. And that I think, feeds into some of these other things that are important, that people do say, this is relevant to how I'm going to vote.
Yeah, it might be better for him to not even throw bones to the left rhetorically, because at least he wouldn't look like he was trying and failing to rein in Bibi. He did.
Right. I don't. In that context, I don't think you get credit for trying and failing to rein in a country that is a client state that, like, it could not continue doing what it's doing if you just turned off the weapon spigot. And
well, he did withhold the one kind of weapon, but that became an occasion for demonstrating how much he's up against. I think he apparently told Israel quietly, didn't announce it, we're withholding this one kind of weapon because we don't want you to do whatever. And then, and I think he kept it quiet for two reasons. First of all, it's not tactically smart to make that public if you're negotiating with Hamas, that your side is in any way constrained in terms of what they can do, or that Israel's getting pressure from the U.S. to do less. But also, I think he was afraid of the domestic political blowback. And naturally, my understanding is that somebody in Israel leaked it, presumably to activate the very political forces that Biden was afraid of. The response was overwhelming. And I think that is the last time he'll try to do anything even that forceful. He was reminded what he's up against in terms of domestic politics. So I don't know.
Pretty grim situation.
I'm worried about the Trump thing. I mean,
in what sense?
Well, the actual wholesale ethnic cleansing of Gaza under being greenlighted by Trump.
But what's different here? I mean, maybe I don't quite see where this doesn't end in that. I don't see at this point how it doesn't end in that, regardless of at this point of what the United States does. I mean, Biden could tomorrow say we're not sending you weapons, and they'll be like, well, we're doing it anyway, and we'll get weapons in some secret deal you do. So I just don't see like that big of a difference on this particular issue. But maybe could you explain where I'm wrong?
Well, first of all, it is a challenging thing logistically for Israel to do. Egypt does not want to absorb any significant number of Gazans. Now, reportedly, Israel has been, months ago, it was reported that Israeli officials were in talks with some African nations to receive some refugees.
Wild. And it's like the Uganda plan. You know what the Uganda plan was, right? It was like a proto-Zionist situation by the British to get the Jews not to have a state in the Middle East, but to resettle them in Uganda. And it's just interesting that is now coming up with resettling of Palestinians.
Yeah, I'm not sure
in Africa.
If Uganda is one of the countries, but that's a basic idea. And of course, Egypt could be strong-armed into accepting some number. But my point is, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not like there's somewhere it's easy to push them into. And that's why I can well imagine a President Biden applying enough pressure when it comes to this, when it comes to actual wholesale ethnic cleansing. I can see Biden applying enough pressure for it not to happen, given the practical obstacles to it happening. But I can see Trump doing his best to facilitate. the process, right? Yeah, you think I'm
Yeah,
wrong?
I mean, I think Biden, Biden doesn't even have to apply pressure. He just has to not agree to be party to the scheme. So he has to agree to, or not agree to bribe the Egyptians with whatever the U.S. would be bribing the
Right.
Egyptians with, or to bribe whoever else would be bought off to allow this to happen. So yeah, I mean, I think Trump would be much more willing to participate in something like that for sure.
In like a
So-
deal, right? So, so
Right,
then
'cause he
in
loves to
some
do
sense,
deals. So
He
yeah.
gets
then
a beachfront property in Gaza for a Trump hotel. Yeah, something like that.
something like that, right? Or some deal that Kushner. But so then, so on one hand, maybe I'm mishearing. You have sort of Democratic party dithering on one hand, and on the other hand, you have sort of Republican evil on the other, sort of explicit evil. But don't they kind of result in the same thing? Or am I missing something?
I'm imagining, half hoping that when you get to atrocity on that scale, like actual wholesale ethnic cleansing, and all of the coercion that would take in terms of, deprivation, if not out and out, direct, more gratuitous killing, whatever.
But that's happening now. Like this
Well,
now,
that's
it's a degree of it's a matter of degree, and not that much of a degree.
Call me naive. I do think that even Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken do not want to go down in history as the people who facilitated the wholesale ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Maybe I'm too optimistic.
I don't think they care. I mean, if they care, they would have done something.
I think they care. I think they care.
I think if they get through the
not really.
election and get reelected, they don't really care how this plays out. Their worry
I don't think they do at
is
all.
whether it affects
Okay.
the reelection.
Yeah. I
Well,
mean, if you just look at the history of American foreign policy makers have been overseeing for decades at this point some of the most gratuitously evil actions in human history. I just don't understand why. Because it's not individuals, it's institutions, right? It's the empire itself and the logic of imperial hegemony. So this is why Marx is once again correct, Bob, and I hope you have finally become a Marxist in the course of our conversations, that you have to focus on the structure. Who cares about the individuals? They don't really matter that much when you're dealing with the level of something like imperialist capitalism.
Yeah, but I don't think, I don't see within the system of American politics a lot of support for the actual. Maybe I'm naive again.
No, it's not even American politics. It's just imperialism. This is a world-spanning global empire.
We should save some of this for the overtime segment, because it's a great conversation about the extent to which politicians respond to, political incentives in their nation, as opposed to serving some kind of imperialistic mandate whose incentive structure is kind of less obvious to me. Like, why, when you can just follow political incentives and remain in office and remain power and get whatever you want, bribes, sex, whatever it is you want out of power, why complicate it by serving some larger imperial agenda?
Well,
I'm not saying an imperial agenda doesn't wind up being served often. It's just a little bit of a mystery to me why it does.
There's an identification of it. There's a personal identification with the American empire. I mean, if you look at someone like Blinken or Biden's socialization and political maturation, they identify with the project, which has defined their entire lives.
That's not the way they think of it, I don't think. They think of themselves as these good people who are spreading democracy and freedom.
Well, I think they think they're preventing worse. At this point, like someone like Samantha Power definitely thinks she's preventing worse by, if it wasn't her, it'd be someone who'd be doing worse. I think that's what a lot of Democratic Party, I mean, if you look at what they say historically, that's off. If you look at Vietnam, right? Like, obviously this is pretty horrible, pretty early, and everyone sees that, but they think that they're doing better than if it was someone else in there, which is linked to like personal desires for power and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, anyway, on the I wrote a thing in the latest Nonzero newsletter about the ethnic cleansing thing and why I'm concerned about that, and especially concerned about a Trump administration. But I will concede for now that I may be being too optimistic about how Biden would handle it. I mean, do you think the thing is going to be?
I think Blinken would just write some good blues music.
I mean, he'd use it for his music.
Yeah, absolutely.
His inspiration.
Fuel his musical ambitions.
That's what he really loves. He introduces himself as actually a guitar player, Bob, and then he goes, and my day job is Secretary of State.
You know, Mickey Kaus went to a rock concert with him once, years ago.
Who would they see?
I don't know. I'm sure Mickey told me. I don't.
It's probably like Anti-Flag, Fugazi.
I didn't know this territory. So anything else on let's see, the Middle East? I mean, a ton has happened since we last spoke. But just quickly, Derek, what do you make of this dust up along the border where Israel killed an Egyptian soldier? I assume that was a one-off.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my understanding, and I haven't like read too deeply into it yet, but my understanding is that this was like in the moment. Some Egyptian border guards got angry, frustrated, emotionally affected at what was going on. And this was the same night that they, bombed the tent camp outside of Rafah, where people had been evacuated to, and killed dozens of people. And the Egyptian guards, I don't know that there's a direct cause and effect there, but the Egyptian guards just got frustrated with the Israelis. And I think that they'll chalk it up to that, because neither government really has an interest, although tensions are much higher now than they were before the Israelis went into Rafah. Neither government has an interest in like making more of this than it was a one-off.
So do you think we're going to just see the full-on, I mean, what did Biden said the red line? I think the woman used the phrase the invasion of Rafah.
Yeah. They're in the center of the city at this point. Like, there are Israeli tanks in the center of the city, and the administration's claim now is that for a while, as this was happening, it was they haven't actually gone into Rafah. We don't see that. We haven't seen it crossing the red line. And now that that's become untenable, their claim is, well, they've adjusted the campaign in response to our concerns, so it's fine. And like, I mean, that's unprovable. So okay, I guess you can, or unfalsifiable, so you can make that claim, I guess. But in what sense? Like, they've displaced 1 million people at this point, according to the UN. So I mean, in what sense is this going any better than you would have thought? And I think David Satterfield, who until recently had been their humanitarian point person for Gaza, was at some event not recently talking about Rafah, and said this has basically been worse than our worst fears. That like it's gone worse than that. The displacement has been more intense. The violence has been more intense. So I mean, it's clear there was never any real red line, or if there was, they dropped it. The instant that the Israelis went in. But again, it's like they have to say something, I guess.
Yeah. One more thing on the Trump, in terms of my Trump anxieties, and look, I have trouble imagining myself summoning the energy to get out and vote for Biden. He's so disappointing in so many ways. But the other thing that worries me about the Trump thing is apparently he's been going around promising donors that he will crack down on these campus protesters, like as if they haven't been cracked down on. And you can imagine that getting pretty ugly, because he'll love it. I mean, and and it's interesting. Did you pay much attention to the UCLA thing? I found that extremely creepy, where you had these kind of pro-Israel thugs joined apparently by some randos, including some stray anti-Semites and just people who didn't like the idea of a foreign flag, flying on a campus or something. I don't know what their thing was exactly, but they all kind of assaulted these protesters, who by and large showed a lot of discipline, for several hours, and law enforcement did not intervene for several hours. And that I found extremely creepy. And under a Trump administration, I can imagine this kind of thing just being like systematically abetted.
I think the first thing he would do is deport any non-citizens who participate in these protests. So if there's a student from abroad, they'd just be kicked out. And
he had said
that's probably the first cut. Yeah, that would be the first cut. And then this gets into how much control does a president have over local police departments, or in terms of tone setting. It's clear, I think, they're already operating with the impunity. They're not afraid of the Biden Justice Department investigating any police brutality or anything like that. But would they be less afraid of that with Trump? I guess probably. Yeah. But I think certainly at the level of like deportation and threatening universities with funding cuts if they don't crack down harder, there are certainly things that he can do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the last thing I'll say is there is apparently political pressure within Israel for Bibi to at least say something about a way this ends that doesn't involve ethnic cleansing, specifically to say, okay, and without occupation even, because they want him, I guess, is it Gantz who wants him, who's threatening to resign? Not that that would be fatal to the coalition, but is threatening to resign if he doesn't. I think the deadline is coming up within a few days.
June 8th, he said. I think.
Before, I actually have a question. I think this is probably for Derek. Derek, let's say somehow it stops tomorrow. What would the scenario even be? Gaza's been demolished.
Well, I mean, the Netanyahu scenario, to the extent that he's articulated one that isn't just let's keep this going. I got to ride this wave or else I'm going to jail. So let's just keep going as long as we can. But the snippets that he's tossed out suggest that the IDF would remain in Gaza in a limited way. It wouldn't be all over the territory, but it would retain probably this corridor that it's built that bifurcates the territory into north and south, with the ability to operate out of that, out of facilities in that corridor to respond to whatever it decided to respond to. But then they would have these like hypothetical trusted Palestinian local administrators who would be in charge. Would mostly be a humanitarian operation at that point. So they'd be in charge of overseeing the humanitarian operation. I have no idea where he would find these people. He's ruled out
seems like
Palestinian
a lot of
Authority. Obviously, Hamas wouldn't. Anybody with ties to Hamas wouldn't be considered. And anybody who did participate in something like that would be tarred as a collaborationist. And I think there would be a great deal of reluctance for local businessmen or people who have been in bureaucratic positions in the administration in Gaza. The governing administration to participate in something like that. So I don't know where he gets that idea from. The idea of that Gantz has, and that even I think Yoav Gallant, although he's also from Netanyahu's party, Likud, that the idea that they have is that you would get this international coalition that would be primarily Arab countries. The rich Arab countries would at least finance it. There would probably soldiers would be provided by, let's say, Egypt or other Arab countries that don't have the resources to pay for it. The U.S. would oversee it somehow with some kind of viceroy or something who would be in ultimate charge of the civilian side of it, and you would have Europe contributing humanitarian support, etc. This is also a fantasy. I mean, it's like we're going to go in and break this place, but then everybody else will clean up our mess after us. Like it's just so fantastic to believe this, and kind of childlike in a sense that you're just going to bust this place up and then dust your hands off and walk away, and the rest of the world will come in and take care of it for you. So I don't see that necessarily happening either. And if it did happen, if you had countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia paying for this, I think they would have to demand. Now, I'm not saying that the UAE or Saudi Arabia, the governments in those places, actually care about the Palestinians. It's clear that they don't. But for public consumption, at least, they would have to demand something from the Israelis that would be tangible progress toward Palestinian statehood, and that would involve the Palestinian Authority, which again is sort of anathema to a lot of people in the Israeli government. And I don't see how it's workable for that to come about. But those are the two options, and anything else is just
both seem pretty
occupation.
fake to me, Derek. So it seems like they're planning on ethnic cleansing. So this is what I don't understand. And the Biden administration absolutely knows this.
And do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think the Palestinian Authority? I mean, part of the ask apparently being made of Bibi by Gantz and so on is to say that okay, the Palestinian Authority would be a legitimate player here, which Bibi hasn't been willing to do. He's equating it to Hamas in terms of its level of evil. But would the Palestinian Authority, A, want to get deeply involved in governing Gaza, and B, be accepted? I mean, it has a better chance of being accepted than just about any other non-Hamas actor, right? Better chance than a bunch of Saudis.
It would depend, I think, to some degree on developments that happen within the Palestinian Authority itself. They would have to accept some kind of turnover in leadership. I mean, Mahmoud Abbas has zero credibility, or near zero credibility, even in the West Bank, which is where the Palestinian Authority governs. As somebody who's actually competent and not corrupt, and actually working for Palestinian statehood and making progress for people, he's mostly despised. So I mean, you would have to come up with somebody, and there are people out there. There are people who have been in Fatah but have relationships with Hamas. There is Marwan Barghouti, who's one of the people at the top of the list, it seems like, for Hamas to get to be released, or who they would like to see released in a prisoner exchange, if any sort of deal like that does ever emerge, who probably have credibility that they could manage both of these places and have some support, some public support, but not as it's currently constructed. I mean, I don't think as currently constructed the PA would be able to govern other than by sort of the same way it does in the West Bank, with some repression and very, very haphazardly in a lot of places where you have these kind of local militia.
And there would have to be a lot of repression, because there would be elements of Hamas that weren't enthusiastic about this.
Right.
I have one more question, but I think it's time that we let the paywall descend and encourage people to follow us into, I mean, we're not even halfway done, into the overtime session, where they can go, if they are paid subscribers to either the American Prestige newsletter / podcast on Substack, or the Non-Zero newsletter / podcast on Substack. And you just go there.
If you're only subscribed to one, subscribe to the other. We've got discounts.
Yes, we've got discounts. And if you don't, want to use a discount, only want to subscribe to one, I would go for Non-Zero personally. But I don't know. There's two of you, and you may have different views.
This could get heated.
Wow,
Yeah,
a boomer trying to undercut millennial entrepreneurship. What a surprise!
This is capitalism,
What a
dude.
surprise.
You claim to know how the system works. Okay. So, and we're going to, there's other stuff we're going to talk about. There is, according to Jamie Kirchick, he's got a piece in the New York Times, says the chill has fallen over Jews in publishing. We've gone to great lengths to have a Jew in publishing in the overtime segment.
Actually,
will
we should
tell us
subscribe to American Prestige, because Danny is struggling to put food on the table.
We're struggling.
Because
under these conditions.
I don't think there are enough Jews in publishing.
a chill has
and
fallen over.
I think you all should support me, as Jamie apparently said in his op-ed.
Also, it's been a while since I bashed the Atlantic. It's been weeks. There's something I really want to. I really want to have a discussion about Jeffrey Goldberg.
Oh, friend of the pod.
Got to be in my bonnet here.
He was almost our third mic.
For this?
Yeah, for American Prestige. It was originally
Yeah.
Bessner, Goldberg, Davison, but he pulled out at the last minute.
You were looking for somebody who didn't know that the title was ironic. American Prestige.
Yeah, right. We needed a third.
That would be a great trio.
Sincerely.
It's like one person doesn't understand what's going on. And then you
More
want me to talk
prison
about Marty
guards.
Parrots.
Yeah. I want to
and if
ask you
there's
about
time, I
Marty
will.
Parrots. Yeah, for sure. Oh, you
And
don't want to
then,
start
I
with
don't know.
Marty talk?
We'll see. We'll keep them in suspense. That's what's gonna, they're on the edge of their seats anyway. You know what you have to do if you want to join us. Not have to do. That's the wrong vibe. I should let Danny handle the phrasing of these things. But anyway, thanks everybody. Whether or not you're going to follow us into overtime, we encourage you to.
This
And
is where we
now-
fry the potatoes.
Yeah, that's the way I would have put
Nice.
it. Yeah, that's the way I should have put it. That was so much better than saying, here's what you have to do. Okay, here we go. Into overtime.